My name is Corey Pellar. I am the CEO and founder of Versus, and I've just been on stage at Leaders Week looking at the future of football and fashion with HUGO Boss's SVP of Global Marketing, James Foster. Hope you enjoy the session. Some woos, that's a good start. I love that. I like the bright energy.
Before lunch?
Yeah, full lunch, yeah. James, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm very happy to be here. It's
Yeah.
the quietest I've ever seen Twickenham, though. Usually there's 80,000 people screaming out there.
There is. We'll make enough
nice.
noise to try and counter that, I guess,
Yeah.
which is good. Firstly, you just back from Milan last week, another fashion week. For anyone who hasn't worked in those environments, they're just absolutely insane. What was that like for you at HUGO Boss last week?
Well, it was my first one, so it was absolutely being dropped in at the deep end. And coming from sport as well in my background, it was similar, a huge amount of build-up. And then it just went perfectly to plan, though, I have to say. I was really impressed with the team. Big difference, there was just a lot more hair and makeup involved last week than what I've been used to in working in sport. But no, it was a great experience.
Amazing. Your career itself, you've been to so many amazing places and your CV is padded with just amazing experiences. Tell the audience a bit about your career journey, how you landed at Boss, and yeah, what your background is.
All right, well, thank you. I'm still a work in progress, I would say, but I'm one of those cliched people that's always kind of followed their passions, and for me, that's always sort of spanned across the worlds of entertainment, sport, and fashion. So most of my career, Sony and Universal Pictures, worked with Soccer AM back in the days, and then 13 years, I think, at Adidas, leading all sorts of categories, Olympic categories. Rugby was one of them, both in the UK and global. And then a small stint at Netflix, which was interesting to see all of the other things that goes on around the culture of sport and entertainment. And then now at HUGO Boss.
Amazing. I've built a business where we cover this content around football, fashion, sport and fashion day in, day out. Yep. And the one thing I found out is that authenticity in these partnerships is paramount. For you and HUGO Boss, why is the brand DNA of Boss so right to play in sport?
Well, I think for me, and I grew up, I'm a kid of the 80s. So Rocky IV, wearing the hoodie was one of those things. And then just watching Ayrton Senna and those amazing moments. So 30 years or more of history, I think, has kind of established us. But I think what makes it unique is that the Boss values, the behaviors, the people working towards being a boss and success driven just works so nicely hand in hand with what it takes to be successful in sport. So the culture of sport and the culture of Boss are just so beautifully sort of intertwined. And I think that gives us reason to be there. Yeah. But it also, I think the key word for me is authentically be there. It's not just put a logo, it's be part of that journey. And I think that's something that Boss has done well. And obviously I'm the new guy in there trying to find that next chapter and that next step on the journey.
Amazing. And to bring back to Rocky IV, the Eye of the Tiger unites both Boss and pro sports. I love that. Look, the sponsorship space is exciting, but it's also quite crowded. When you look at fashion and football, fashion and sport, fashion and running, fashion and F1, there's a lot of partners that are in there right now. And as exciting as it is, I think you have to work really hard to stand out. So for you, what makes a great partnership?
Look, I think firstly, it's authenticity, because you're right, it's an incredibly saturated, very fiercely competitive space, and there's some brands that will always be able to outspend the other. So the thing for me, the core ingredient is it a good partnership on both sides? Is it a partnership where you both walk away from it as a winner? And that doesn't always mean top of the podium, but it can be really about how can we build a story that's authentic and that speaks to the audience. And the fandom of sport and the fandom of fashion, I think, just overlap beautifully. So I think that's one of the key ingredients, I would say.
For sure. And I think within every fashion and sport partnership, aspiration is such a key component. Yep. And there might not be a more aspirational sport right now than F1. So I want to dive a little bit into the Boss partnership with Aston Martin. Why was that the right connection for both brands?
Well, look, Boss is in a premium and fashion space, and I think when you look around other brands that share that same space, it would be a pretty obvious suggestion to say Aston Martin is a pinnacle brand in that space. It's refined, it's luxurious, it's a brand which I think has got a lot of good overlaps with us. And going back to what I said earlier, also it's a company which shares a lot of the same values and behaviors that we do. So it was a good sort of symbiotic match culturally. And when we first started working with Aston Martin, there's multiple dimensions to it. So it's how can we make the drivers look great, you know, and we produce a collection with them, so there was a commercial component to it. There's such history as well within the brand, which is something that we wanted to dive into and work and develop, help them develop their brand. And it's, you know, luxury car is not an easy space either. And then of course there's Formula One, and the performance, you know, dreams of the owners and of the teams, you know, matches very perfectly with also what we're trying to do. You know, this is a team with huge goals, and you know, next year very interested to see how they do with Adrian's new car that's coming out. But it's just a really exciting space, and obviously, you know, I think the previous guests have also talked about, you know, Formula One is just such a hotbed right now. And for us to be in that space, we wanted to make sure that we did it in a way that we weren't just a logo on a car, of which there's many brands that do that, but it's also all those other dimensions that we wanted to bring to life. And they've absolutely sort of held our hand through that, and we've pushed and pulled each other in ways which I think is really starting to lead to a really healthy, interesting relationship. And probably just to finish on that, we just arrived this morning. We just did a launch with Aston Martin over at our Regent Street store, where we partnered up with Apple and with EPAM and obviously the racing team, putting those Apple Vision Pro goggles on people's heads to give you a taste of experience. You know, for us, it's great because it brings people into store. It's an exciting experience, but it's also something that just helps build the brand in all these multiple dimensions. And I guess the conclusion for me is that it works with Aston Martin because they want to push in all those different directions. It's not just Boss on a car, you know, that anyone can do that, but it's how do we build the lifestyle component of the two brands together and do unexpected things. And together we also are able to attract good partners like Apple and EPAM and all these sort of leaders in that space, which has been really, really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because you often think of fashion and sport partnerships, collaborations, and think it is about product first and foremost, and that's sort of where the line ends. But in reality, there are so many activations, storylines that you can tell through these partnerships. I mean, if you look through this sort of wheel of activity on the slide behind us here, like logo and branding, content, driver integration, event activations, innovation, and then the product itself. Why do all these pieces matter, and what ones like excite you the most?
Well, they matter because, like I said, you know, if it's a true partnership, then there is a win-win for both sides. So, for example, when at the early stage of the Formula One season, we just launched a flagship store in Shanghai. Formula One was in town. You know, we had Lance, we had Alonso, all coming into the store. We had the Formula One car in there. And it sounds a little basic, but the fandom that it creates, that we're able to tap into, and it's the hardcore Formula One fans, but it's also the really exciting new audience that we're seeing there. It's the 12, 20-year-old women that are coming in that was just not a traditional audience for Formula One, and this excitement is something that's really you know, special to see. On top of that, there's also some additional things which, you know, when you're working with a partner like Aston Martin, you know, we have loyalty programs like a lot of brands. And there's the money can't buy stuff, you know, and okay, maybe if you've got a good bank account, you can go to a paddock club or whatever thing. But for us, it's also how can we use that to bring our customers into a money can't buy experience. And Aston Martin have been great partners in opening up those sort of doors which don't typically open. And that's just, you know, helped us a great deal in building those long-term relationships with our customers, but it's also helped them really build that brand. So, you know, there's just so many different aspects to it.
For sure. And I think you talk through so many ways in which these partnerships can be additive to the culture and experience of both fans, but also those who work in the space. However, there's always a big commercial component to any sponsorship. So when you try and define success for Hugo Boss in any sponsorship you look at, like, you know, you have things like visibility, sales, cultural relevance. Like, what are your personal yardsticks for what a good partnership and sponsorship looks like?
So I would say all of those become hygiene factors, to be honest, the media value that you generate and things like that, because I think anybody for any brand would say, okay, that's what we look for. But for me, what we look for is real cultural traction. Are we able to get people talking? Are they caring? Are they challenging us? And it's fine that we want people to challenge us, but it's about not just having a one-way conversation, it's about having a two-way flow. And the partnerships, whether it's in Formula One or any of the sports that we're in, it's not just about what happens on the field of play. It's about what happens in the culture around it. And that's what's great, because that allows us to engage with people and non-typical sport fans, but just because we're doing something cool and interesting. So bringing our drivers or our tennis players or any of our athletes onto the catwalk or into the stores, or doing things in an unexpected and interesting way, so that we build the overall conversation outside of the sort of the typical audience. That's what I really look for, and and doing things that surprises and delights and maybe challenges things a little bit.
No, I think we've spoken through the amazing link and success you can have when you sponsor organizations, events, but I think the thing that probably gets most people excited from a consumer basis are like athlete ambassadorships and those partnerships. I would strongly argue that when you look at popular culture right now, no one has more cut through than elite level athletes. They just dominate every lane of conversation. For you, like, how important are athlete ambassadorships to the Boss brand?
Yeah. Well, look, the basic answer is all the things that I said that work in terms of our partnerships with companies like Aston Martin. It kind of also applies to the individual, but there's something more personal and about that. And when we are working with athletes, it's about that overlap and match of behavior and values and culture. And when we're working with our current roster or whoever we want to work with in the future, it's really about how do they complement what we're doing as a brand, and how can we support them? And I think that bit is one of the more interesting topics, because there's the transactional part of any relationship, but there's also the brand building. There's what does that person do beyond the 90 minutes or the however many laps they're racing or whatever it might be. And I think that's where it gets interesting for us. And when we identify or approach people, or they approach us, it's because they want to do something above and beyond just winning the Grand Slam or winning the race. And that's when it opens up, I think, just so much more creativity. And that's also what I think helps stand out. There's tons of good examples where I think we've managed to do that.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because for me, what I've seen change is you no longer just have those transactional ambassadorships or sponsorships, but you do have far more creativity and collaboration. Have you seen that change directly, and how much more do you think athletes will be empowered within these sponsorships?
I have seen it. I mean, having spent nearly 20 years now in various different aspects of sport and entertainment, I've seen a big shift over that period of time. And I think if you look further, it probably is even more dramatic. But athletes seeing themselves as brands and seeing the value and the potential of building themselves clearly there's a revenue component for them, but also what it means to be successful. So that's been really helpful, and I think their understanding of what that means for them in terms of how they show up on social media, how they present themselves in all dimensions, not just what they do on the field, but what they do in all those other 22 hours of the day is something that we've seen a big shift towards. And when we look at a lot of the athletes that we've got, some of them maybe aren't going to win multiple Olympic gold medals, but some of them have got incredibly feverish, hardcore, passionate fan base. Alicia Smith, 6.5 million Instagram followers, and what she does is able to really engage with people in a way which probably you can't do if you don't have that awareness of what else it takes probably to engage with people. And that's super attractive for us as a brand, because when firstly it's authentic, but secondly it just introduces us in a way to some of our customers that we might not typically get to speak to. So there's just a whole load of different dimensions like that which we filter through.
And one person I wanted to pick out was Taylor Fritz specifically.
Yep.
Why was he the right fit for Boss, and why is your work with him so exciting to you right now?
And I don't know if anyone watched Tokyo last night, but he was getting there. One more attempt, hopefully, and he'll beat one of the top 2 or 3. But Taylor, firstly, was really, really interesting. And we started, maybe just to digress for a second, but we started our tennis journey with Mario Berrettini a couple of years ago, and then we added Taylor to the platform, to the brand a couple of years ago. And he was really attractive for a lot of reasons. One, actually, that he is attractive. That, you know, we're a fashion brand. Let's not miss that point. And he has a good sense of style. But he opened our show last year in Milan at Fashion Week. So we've managed to sort of work with him and help build his brand. But one of the things that attracted, obviously, he's an amazing athlete. That's kind of a given. But he has a real dream. And if you speak to Taylor, and he's a very humble, very quite shy actually person, but if you ask him what's your goal, he's like, look, I'm not content with just being the #1 tennis player in the US. I want to be the #1 tennis player in the world. I am a work in progress. I'm grafting, I'm working hard, I'm pushing myself. And that is just the perfect link to who we are as a brand. We're not just about the people that have made it and probably are, you know, so far away from reality. It's the people working and aspiring towards. And Taylor's journey, and we brought Taylor into our Winter 25 campaign, so the one that might be on your social feeds if you follow Boss right now. And it's exactly that story. It's Taylor talking about what's that burning ambition that he has in order to get to where, you know, he wants to be, and how we as a brand kind of support him in that. That's why it works so nicely with Taylor. And even when he's wearing his headband upside down, he's got a great sense of humor as well, which helps. So there's a load of things that make Taylor just a really fun person to work with, and I'm confident that he's gonna break the whatever it is, the jinx that he calls it, right now, and get one of the big titles.
And I think the upside down headband is something I wanted to sort of sit on for a second. In the when you look at the modern day athlete, I think they're far more expressive, far more fun, far more reflexive than any generation before them. And like social media is a big part of that because it lets them show sides of their character that just wasn't possible 15, 20 years ago. For you as like a fashion brand, the expectation is everything is clean, pristine, the best it can possibly be. But how important is actually embracing like the human characteristics of athletes as well?
So important. I mean, I talked about the brand values, and that means being human, because it's not about a perfect vision of everything, because that's not relatable. That's not who we are as a brand. And very few people probably would say I'm the finished product anyway. So embracing those little moments, those errors, those human things, which hopefully sometimes also can be funny and you know, just personality led. That's what I love about it. And you know, as soon as Taylor, someone made him aware, you know, you saw his comment, why did nobody tell me, whatever, that it was upside down, and we were there ready as well, looking at it, going, come on, we've got to play with this. Yeah. So, and he was like, oh God, you know, let's do something here. And I think if it was too serious, or if it wasn't a good relationship, you know, he wouldn't have been up for that, you know, having a bit of fun with it. And I think it was a nice moment. I would have preferred it if he'd have won, of course.
Of course, yeah, ideally. So we've looked at F1, looked at tennis. Boss has also worked famously with Anthony Joshua in boxing, David Beckham in football. You mentioned Alicia Smith from athletics. How much do the sports matter, or is it more an athlete-powered conversation when you look at who to work with?
Yeah, I mean, sports do matter to a point, but I would say the thing that kind of that leads most of our thinking and prioritization is, you know, is it an athlete who matches the values? Yeah. What is their goal? What's the journey that they're on? But of course, we do try to match it to things like, well, okay, where's our biggest markets? What's their footprint in China or the US or Europe? You know, the road to LA 28, for example. You know, these things all have a factor in it. Where are they in their career? You know, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a number of dimensions, but I wouldn't say that we have one fixed formula. You know, and if is an amazing boxer or an athlete, or, you know, tennis is probably where we're the more established and with Formula One, but golf, obviously a rich playing ground for us. So it helps when it has a connection back to a core competence, which for us is obviously tailoring and making, you know, our outfits, you know, so that's a good link. But it would be also silly to say that we'll ignore things. We'll prioritize things, but we'll also wait and see who's the right fit. And what's good, and I take this as a, you know, really encouraging signal. There's so many of the big brands, you know, and I'm ex-Adidas person, and obviously Nike and those guys. There's so many that just go through that sort of factory almost. What we represent, and there's obviously other brands also in this space, they give the athletes an opportunity to stand out and be a little bit distinctive. So we won't work with hundreds and hundreds, but we'll work with the right athletes who want to come on that journey with us. So it's a bit of a point of difference for them, but that's why it's really important that we work with them in a unique and distinctive way.
For sure. I will say, for any audience members that might want to ask questions, please do throw them in. We've got about 10 minutes left, so please do send us your questions via the Leaders app. On athletes specifically, now, Boss traditionally, and every fashion brand really, works with models and creators first and foremost. How much do athletes differ on set, in front of a camera, during ideation, campaign sessions? How's that experience of working with athletes in this sort of context?
What can I say about that? It's always an interesting journey. Probably is the best way to describe it. And go back to Taylor. Taylor was so nervous the first time we brought him in to do a campaign. The catwalk and stuff like that. He was just shaking about it. But the truth is, once you go through that familiarization and sort of getting to know each other and getting to know what his thing is that he really wants to be mindful of, and and he understands our goals, then the journey gets a lot easier. Some for sure are way more au fait and prepared. Alicia is, she'd be as happy walking down the catwalk as she would be running around the 800. So she's probably a great example who's got such confidence across both disciplines. But most of our athletes, I'd say, we kind of take them on a journey. And we've got, we've just been shooting our winter 2026, our summer 2026 campaign last week. I won't say the names, but we've got some really exciting athletes that will also be, coming into that, which match that. I want to be the next boss. I want to come on that journey with you. And I think that's, it's really good to see them grow in their confidence.
For sure. I think there will be a lot of people in the audience today who maybe have athlete relationships, might manage athletes, they might work at clubs, organizations, bodies that think they can play in this fashion space. What advice would you have for them to almost like catch the attention of a fashion brand, or almost like to get their brand ready to make the step with a brand like Hugo Boss?
I think the advice that I would give, but from the experience that I've had so far at Boss, and maybe also a little bit at Adidas, it's really been able to understand what is the position that brand holds, and how does that match with their ambitions. Because if it's purely transactional, it can work, sure, but I think the bigger win for both sides is having that sort of mutual overlap of what it is that we want to stand for. Does that brand speak to me? Does the culture of it speak to me? And then finding that, it's like any good relationship, it's got to be about understanding both sides. And for the fashion brands going into sport, I think it's got to have that understanding of the athlete, and the athlete wants to work with a fashion brand. It's okay, does that brand speak to me, and what is it that I think I can bring to them? And I think I would always start with that almost sort of first date in the process, and understanding the personalities on both sides. And then it just comes down to who do you think's got that right fit? And if it's for us, suiting and fashion, who is it that's got a bit of a style sense? If it's someone who you've never seen outside of a pair of sweatpants, then it might not be an authentic step. But if it's someone who already expresses, and you look at US sports, the athletes who are doing the tunnel walk and already got such a high level of understanding of what it is to express themselves through fashion, that's a great first step. I think that is probably when you hit our radar, and vice versa, when they look at our show and they go, okay, that's a brand that's speaking to me. So it's a little bit of the art and science like that, I would say.
Cool. Before we break into our audience questions, which are flying through, so thank you very much for anyone who sent something in. On a personal note, what excites you most about working at this ever-growing intersection of fashion and sport?
Well, having done it for 20 years now, I don't think I've ever had a dull moment where we've had like the same challenge from one year to the next. It's just so constantly moving and dynamic. And I know that, again, sounds a little bit of a cliche, but it's so fast-paced, with brands coming in with so many different ambitions, and athletes being so much more worldly and hungry with what they're trying to do. And it's just finding, those constant moments where it comes together in a beautiful way. And, for for what excites me personally is obviously the journey that we're on with Boss. You know, we talked about Rocky IV at the beginning, and we talked about Ayrton Senna, and we've got an amazing set of relationships now. But I'm super excited about where we're going in the future because it is such a competitive space. But I care less about what we've done in the past and more about what we want to do in the future. And I think that's the competitive element, which is exciting here, because you have to work hard. You have to think, you know, more rigorously and push harder than the competition. And in fashion, it's just like sport. It's pretty dog eat dog. 100%. So you got to work hard, and that's a nice way of, I think, matching up with the values and the way what makes sport so amazing and special.
For sure. And as dog eat dog as this space is, I'm sure there's also a lot of mutual respect between brands that play in this space. So I'm going to take that sort of line to bring our first audience question to the forefront, which is, what other brands do you admire in this space, and who do you think is getting it wrong?
Okay. I admire Louis Vuitton's budgets. I think that's something I'm not going to dismiss. I admire, look, I think, I'm not going to dismiss, I think that Adi, my old brand, is doing some great work and bringing some really interesting, fresh thinking to all dimensions of sport and fashion right now. What was the second bit? Who am I?
Who's getting it wrong? If you had to share anything on that. Or I suppose, what are the hallmarks of getting it wrong? Maybe you don't name brands specifically.
Yeah.
What do you see as a repeat habit that actually doesn't work in this space?
I think, look, there's a constant threat in advertising, if I can use that as the lens to view these things on, and that is dull media. Putting a logo on something or doing something bland or, you know, just boring. Okay, maybe you can use the corporate box and justify it in that way, but if you really want to cut through, I think you've got to just be more exciting. I see a lot of dull stuff, and I challenge us to also make sure that we're constantly keeping the edges of the brand sharp, because I can't talk about cultural relevance and traction without understanding what it takes to get there. But I see a lot of brands spending a huge amount of money and not doing anything particularly exciting. And if I look at advertising and creativity as the way of measuring that, there's a lot of stuff out there which doesn't excite me. And I think that's the challenge that our industries all face right now. You've got to utilize creativity more.
Another great question. We mentioned Alicia Smith and how important she is to your brand. In general, how do Boss approach partnerships with female athletes and ensure that visibility is championed and representation is equal across both men's and women's sports?
Well, firstly, it's a great question. And I remember some years ago when I was doing some work with adidas and doing an activity around the US Open, and I got grilled for 90 minutes by Billie Jean King about why adidas should be involved in women's sport. And as a father of two daughters, I think it was something important to me to say, look, this is important that we remove barriers for women in sport and find ways of really pushing participation in all aspects. And when it comes to Boss, we're on a journey for sure. Alicia is a great spokesperson, and we have some ways to go. But in order to be authentic and to grow our business, we need to be representative, and we need to push super hard to make sure that you know, we have great partners. And I think it's about absolutely making sure that we grow our business with our, you know, we want to have a good gender balance of where our, you know, men's and women's business comes from. And I think understanding athletes, and particularly women athletes, is so important in that. So we have some really exciting things that I can't go into and reveal now, but it's such a priority for us. And maybe in a year's time, I'll share all the things that we've got in the pipeline.
Fantastic. Come back next year for more information. James, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
We're out of time right now, but thanks for your questions. And yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.